The studio felt colder than it looked on TV. The lights were bright, but they carried no warmth. Cameras stood like silent guards, and behind them, a small live audience waited, some leaning forward in their seats. They were here for the clash. That's what the show promised. Piers Morgan was known for pushing, for digging until he found a crack. Tonight, his guest was KeanuReeves. Keanu sat in the chair across from him, posture relaxed, hands folded loosely in his lap. He wore a plain black jacket, nothing flashy. He didn't come here to sell a movie. He didn't come here for himself at all. But the producers had made it clear. They wanted a raw interview. In their world, raw meant pressure. Piers smiled at the cameras before turning to his guest. Keanu, you've built a reputation as Hollywood's humble nice guy. Let's be honest. People have been saying for years you're just average in acting, in range, and everything. So tell me, why do you think people still care? A few chuckles rippled through the audience, the kind that come when they're not sure if it's a joke. Piers leaned back, satisfied with his opening shot. Keanu didn't answer right away. He let the question hang in the air, unshaken by the slight sting in Piers' tone. His eyes stayed calm, steady. Piers tried again, sharper this time. Come on, no deflecting. Why do people like you? Is it pity? Nostalgia? Or maybe you're just lucky to be where you are? The audience shifted uncomfortably. The pause between each word felt heavier. Keanu took a slow breath.
Ow!
He didn't meet Piers with arguments or self-defense. Instead, he said quietly, if you measure worth by talent alone, you miss the whole person. I'd rather be remembered for how I treated people than for how perfectly I delivered a line. The room went still. Piers blinked, caught off guard by the simplicity of it. But Keanu wasn't finished. Fame is loud, he continued, but kindness is quiet. It's not for headlines. It's for the moments no one sees. Piers. He gave a short laugh, trying to regain control. So you're saying acting doesn't matter? Keanu shook his head slightly. Acting matters. Work matters. But a good role doesn't make you a good person. And no award is worth more than looking someone in the eyes and knowing you didn't hurt them to get ahead. Something in his tone shifted the air. The audience wasn't laughing anymore. They were leaning in. Piers opened his mouth, but for the first time, words didn't come easily. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was loaded, and everyone could feel it in that silence. A young woman in the front row who had come expecting entertainment suddenly remembered a night years ago when a stranger had helped her carry groceries after her car broke down. She realized, without fully knowing why, that this was the same kind of quiet power. Keanu sat there, unflinching, and the moment stretched longer than TV producers liked. Piers looked down at his notes, searching for the next question, but the paper in front of him suddenly felt useless. The interview had only just begun, but something had already shifted. This wasn't going to be the takedown Piers had imagined. Asterisk, the producer counted down with his fingers, and the red tally light blinked alive again. The room straightened itself, like everyone had taken the same quiet breath. Piers Morgan leaned forward with a controlled smile, the kind that said he wasn't done. He shuffled his cards, even though he knew the next question by heart. He wanted to move Keanu off that calm ground and onto something sharper. All right, Keanu, Piers said. Let's talk about the darkness behind the nice guy image. Grief, loss, the stories everyone whispers, but you never discuss. People say your silence is a strategy. I say it's a shield. You hiding behind kindness because you're afraid to show the mess underneath? A murmur rolled through the audience. The question was heavy, pointed, built to make anyone flinch. Keanu didn't. He sat still, his eyes on Piers, the corners of his mouth soft, neither smiling nor tense. He let the silence do its work first. The silence stretched and became its own answer. Then he spoke in a low voice that traveled across the room like steady rain. Pain is not a performance, he said. When people are hurting, they don't owe the world a tour. Piers tilted his head, so you refuse to talk about it. I talk about it when I can help someone, Keanu replied. Not when it makes good television. The audience reacted to that. A short breath in unison, a few nods, a warmth that grew from the front row backward. Piers caught it and moved on quickly. Fine, then talk about this. Yeah. There's a video from last year. Woman in a subway car. You gave up your seat. People called you a saint, and the clip went viral. But some critics said it was just branding. Clean gesture. Easy. What do you say to them? Keanu's expression flickered into a faint smile. If giving your seat is branding, I hope more people brand themselves. A few laughs slipped out, soft, not mocking. Continued. I didn't know there was a camera. Most kindness never gets filmed. That's the point. It's supposed to be small and human. It's supposed to be for one person, not everyone. Piers opened his mouth, closed it, then tried another road. Okay, then prove it. Tell me a story right now that isn't about you being perfect. Tell me about a time you failed someone. Keanu looked down at his hands, then back up. Once. Young actor asked me for advice between takes, he said. I was tired. I was in my head. I brushed him off. Later I found him outside, sitting alone. I apologized. I told him I was wrong. I still think about it. I hope he forgave me. Kindness is not a resume. It's a decision you keep making after you fail. That answer didn't land where Piers wanted. It didn't crack. It didn't cry. It didn't beg. It settled, honest, imperfect, disarming. The audience leaned closer again, like flowers turning toward light. From the control room window, the head producer flashed a note on a small monitor that only Piers could see. Push harder. Ask about the letter. Piers blinked. The letter, he shuffled his cards and found a printed page with blurred text and a single name blacked out. We received something interesting before the show, he said. An email. From someone who says your words kept him alive on a night when he was ready to give up. He claims you met him later by chance, that you bought him dinner, that you walked him home. Daniel, if you're watching, you wrote this, didn't you? A camera swung toward the audience as if searching for a ghost. A woman in the second row put a hand over her mouth. A man in the back wiped his eyes. Piers turned the paper around. Is this story true, Keanu? Or is it another viral myth? Keanu's gaze dropped for a heartbeat. He knew the truth in the page, the weight of that night air on a quiet street, the way a stranger's voice can tremble when he chooses life again. He lifted his eyes. It's true, he said softly. But it's not my story. It's his. Piers pressed. Why not bring him on the show? Why not make it public, if it's so inspiring? Because survival is not content, Keanu answered. I asked his permission before even saying this much. I would never trade his pain for a headline. Room absorbed that, like a warm blanket. Even the camera operator stopped blinking so much. Piers felt the balance tilt and tried to pull it back with logic. But you must know that stories like this raise your image, help your brand, book more roles. Isn't there a part of you that calculates that? Keanu shook his head once. I don't manage a brand, he said. I try to be a person. I fail, and I try again. Sometimes I get it right. Then, without warning, something unexpected happened. A stage assistant hurried to the desk and set down a small tablet, whispering into Piers' ear. Piers glanced at the screen, then frowned. Live comments from the broadcast were flooding in faster than usual. There were thousands, then tens of thousands. Each one a short story, a thank you, memory of a quiet kindness done for them by someone who never asked to be seen. Piers hesitated, then read one aloud. My brother hasn't called me in 3 years. I'm texting him now. He scrolled and picked another. I was going to quit tonight. I'm staying. Another, I forgot what dignity sounded like. Now I remember. The audience went silent again, but this time it wasn't tense. It was full. Keanu's eyes softened. He seemed to be listening. To something larger than the room, Piers cleared his throat, suddenly aware of his own voice. He had come for a crack and found a mirror. He tried to hide it, but a small break ran through his tone. All right, he said, let's do something practical. You talk about small human things. What does that look like for people watching right now? Keanu's answer came without pause. Call someone you miss, he said. Forgive someone who didn't know better. Eat with a neighbor. Let a stranger go first. Write the letter you've been avoiding. And if you're in a dark room tonight, tell yourself you can leave the light off and still be worth loving. Someone in the audience quietly started to cry. Another person reached over and held their hand. Piers watched it happen and forgot the next card. The producer in the booth stopped pushing new prompts. The camera found Keanu's face and stayed there, steady, unhurried. Piers tried one last angle. Some people will say this is all soft talk, that the world is hard and you're giving people comfort instead of truth. Keanu's voice didn't rise. Comfort is a truth, he said. So is responsibility. Kindness is not the opposite of strength. It is a kind of strength that refuses to turn people into targets. He paused, then added, and silence is not surrender. Sometimes, silence is how you choose not to wound. That line landed like a bell. The title they'd written for the segment, Pierce the Myth, felt suddenly out of place. The audience didn't clap. They didn't need to. They just breathed together. Then the twist none of them saw coming. Edged in from the wings, the floor manager raised a hand for a final audience question. A man stood in the aisle, nervous, holding a small envelope. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice shaking. "I didn't think I'd get picked. My name is Matthew. I'm the driver who almost hit a pedestrian 2 years ago because I looked down at my phone. Someone pulled him back just in time. I never found him to say thank you." He held up the envelope. "I wrote a letter anyway. I brought it in case he was watching." Swallowed, turned, and looked not at Keanu, but at a quiet young man. Seated near the exit, a man who had slipped in late, cap pulled low, eyes tired but hopeful. "Daniel," the driver whispered, "I think it was you." Heads turned.
Oh.
The audience parted like water. The young man froze, then stood slowly. Letter. Trembling in his hand, the same kind of trembling that happens when a life turns back toward itself, Keanu didn't move. He let the moment belong to them. The cameras, drawn by instinct more than direction, framed Daniel and Matthew in the same shot. Piers, for once, did not speak. He put down his cards. The studio wasn't cold anymore. It felt like a window had been cracked open and the night air had slipped in. Two strangers took a step toward each other. No music swelled. No headline flashed. There was only a quiet, human sound. Two people saying each other's names like they mattered. Keanu sat in his chair and closed his eyes for one breath. Then he opened them and watched. The way you watch a dawn you didn't expect to see. Asterisk, the studio audience wasn't breathing the same way anymore. There was no clapping, no polite cue to laugh, just that heavy, magnetic stillness that happens when people know they're watching something they will remember for the rest of their lives. Daniel stood there, unsure if he should move. Matthew. The driver still held the envelope like it weighed 100 pounds. Finally, Daniel stepped forward. Their eyes met in the middle of the aisle. No cameras moved in closer. No one dared break the quiet. "It was you," Matthew said softly, almost like he didn't trust his own voice. "I remember your face now. You pulled me back and I didn't even stop to thank you. I just drove away because I was scared." Daniel's voice was steady, but it had a tremor underneath. "I didn't want thanks. I just didn't want you." To hit him, Matthew blinked. "Hit who?" "Yourself," Daniel said. "You looked like someone who might not care if the car hit you too." Matthew swallowed hard. He nodded once, slowly, as if Daniel had just said something he had never admitted to anyone else. In the corner, Keanu sat with his hands clasped together, watching. He wasn't in the center of this moment. He didn't need to be. The truth was unfolding between these two strangers, and he was letting it happen. Piers Morgan shifted in his chair, torn between the journalist in him that wanted to dig and the human being in him that knew he should leave it alone. "Do you want to open the letter?" Piers asked gently. Matthew shook his head. "Not yet. I'd rather give it to him when there aren't cameras." He turned to Daniel. Maybe we could get coffee after this." Daniel gave a small, surprised smile. "Yeah, I'd like that." The audience breathed out like they'd been. Holding air for too long, Piers looked back at Keanu. He'd been quiet through all of this. Keanu leaned forward slightly. Sometimes the best way to hold a moment is not to speak over it. Piers tilted his head. "So you think this what just happened is more important than the interview?" Keanu's eyes softened. "It is the interview. This is what it's supposed to be about. People, connection, the things that outlast the cameras." Then, the producer in the booth's voice came in through Piers' earpiece. Sharp and urgent. We've got something on the feed. It's about Daniel. Don't end the segment yet. Piers frowned, then looked to the big monitor on the wall, where live comments were streaming in. A username caught his eye. Lion's Shadow. Comment read, "Tell Daniel he's not safe. They found him." Keanu's gaze shifted instantly. Piers read it aloud, and the audience murmured in confusion. Daniel's face drained of color before anyone could explain. Another comment appeared from the same username. "Check your phone." Daniel's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, his hand shaking, and looked at the screen. Whatever he saw made him grip the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. "What is it?" Keanu asked, his voice low but urgent. Daniel looked up at him, eyes wide. "They know where I live." The atmosphere in the studio changed instantly. The warmth was gone, replaced by a sharp electric tension. Piers glanced at the cameras, unsure if they should cut to commercial. The audience didn't move. Keanu rose from his chair slowly, like a man who had already decided what he was going to do next. "Then we're not letting you go home alone," he said firmly. Daniel swallowed, the weight of those words hitting him harder than the threat itself. What none of them knew was that this wasn't a random danger. It was connected to something Daniel had been running from for years. Something that would pull Keanu into a world he never asked to enter. The moment the cameras cut for a break, the studio transformed from a controlled stage into a tense backstage scramble. Producers whispered sharply into headsets. Crew members pretended to check cables while clearly eavesdropping. And Piers Morgan sat back in his chair, watching the scene like he had stumbled into a story even he didn't know how to tell. Keanu stepped down from the stage and went straight to Daniel. "Who sent you that message?" His voice was calm, but his eyes were locked in. Daniel shook his head quickly. "I don't know. I haven't heard from anyone in months. I thought maybe they stopped looking for me." Keanu frowned. "Who's they?" Daniel glanced around at the crowded set and lowered his voice. "If I tell you, you'll wish you didn't know." Keanu leaned closer. "Too late for that. You're not going to handle this alone." Daniel hesitated, his hands tightening around his phone like it might slip away if he let go. 3 years ago, I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. I worked night shifts at a print shop, and one night a man came in with documents he said were confidential. He paid cash, told me not to keep copies, but I did. Keanu's brows drew together. "Why?" Daniel's voice was barely a whisper. "Because the pages had names. Dozens of them. And next to each name was a word neutralized, pending, or target. It didn't look like police work. It looked like something worse." Keanu's jaw tightened. "And you kept them?" "I hid them," Daniel admitted. "But a week later, 2 men came to my apartment asking questions. I left that night and never went back." He took a shaky breath, and I think they finally found me. Before Keanu could respond, one of the producers approached with forced politeness. "Mr. Reeves, Piers is asking if you're okay to continue after the break." Keanu glanced toward the stage, then back at Daniel. "We're not going back out there," the producer frowned. "It's live television," Keanu cut him off. "Then you'll have to fill the time." His tone wasn't loud, but it was final. He turned to Daniel. "Come on." He slipped out through a side exit, into the cool London night. The air smelled faintly of rain and car exhaust. Keanu walked with a quiet urgency, scanning the street. "Do you have somewhere safe to go?" Daniel shook his head. "Nowhere they wouldn't find." Keanu thought for a moment, then pulled out his phone. "I know a place. We'll need to get there without being followed." They crossed 2 streets and ducked into a narrow alley. Where the noise of the city faded, Keanu stopped, listening. Far off, footsteps echoed, too even, too deliberate. "Keep moving," Keanu murmured. They came out the other side of the alley into a dimly lit lane. A black car idled at the curb, engine humming. A man in a dark coat stood beside it, looking straight at them. Daniel froze. "That's one of them." Keanu stepped forward, placing himself between Daniel and the man. "What do you want?" The man's voice was calm, almost polite. "I'm here to offer him protection." "Protection from what?" Keanu asked. The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. From the people who will kill him for what he knows. But that protection has a price. Daniel's grip tightened on Keanu's sleeve. Don't trust him, he whispered. The man in the coat took a slow step forward. You have until midnight to decide. The choice won't be yours. He got back into the car, and it pulled away, leaving the two of them standing in the dim glow of a single flickering street lamp. Keanu looked at Daniel. We're not waiting until midnight, Daniel's voice shook. Then what do we do? Keanu's jaw set. We make the first move. What neither of them knew was that making the first move would mean stepping into something far bigger, far more dangerous than either of them imagined. The rain began just after the black car disappeared. Soft at first, then heavier, masking the sound of their footsteps as Keanu led Daniel through the winding streets. London at night could hide a lot, if you knew where to walk and when to stop. Keanu moved with the quiet confidence of someone who'd learned to read a street the way most people read a book. Where are we going? Daniel asked, his voice low, as if the buildings themselves might be listening. Somewhere they won't look for you, Keanu replied. A friend owes me a favor. 15 minutes later, they reached a nondescript brick building tucked between two shuttered shops. The windows were dark, but Keanu knocked twice, paused, then knocked 3 more times in a pattern. After a moment, the door opened to reveal a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a leather jacket. Keanu, she said with a mix of surprise and curiosity. This must be serious. It is, he answered. We need a safe place for the night. No questions asked. She looked at Daniel for a moment, assessing him in silence, then stepped aside. Come in. Inside, the air smelled faintly of tea and old wood. The woman locked 3 separate bolts on the door before speaking again. Name's Alina. I don't do charity, but for you, I'll make an exception once. Daniel nodded awkwardly. Thank you, Keanu explained. Just enough for her to understand the risk. Elena's eyes narrowed at the mention of the man in the black coat. If he's involved, you've stepped into something deep. They don't just scare people, they erase them. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. So what am I supposed to? Do you keep running forever? Keanu looked at him steadily. No, you stand your ground. First, you make sure you're not standing alone. They spent the next hour at Elena's small kitchen table, going over everything Daniel remembered about the documents from the print shop. Names, words, dates. Keanu wrote them down carefully in a small notebook. This is enough to make them nervous, Elena said, but not enough to stop them. They'll still come. Then we need more, Keanu replied. Around midnight, Elena offered them a spare room. Daniel tried to sleep, but every creak of the old building made him flinch. Keanu sat in a chair by the window, watching the street below. At 2:14 a.m., shadow moved outside, too slow to be casual, too deliberate to be lost. Keanu tapped lightly on the wall to wake Daniel. We've got company. They both crept to the window. The dark van was parked across the street, its engine running. 2 figures stood near it, scanning the building. Alina appeared in the doorway, a small pistol in her hand. You didn't lead them here, did you? Keanu shook his head. They would have found this place eventually. They're tracking him somehow. Daniel's hand went to his pocket. My phone. Without a word, Keanu took it, pried out the SIM card, and dropped it into a mug of water. We'll leave now, he said. Alina grabbed a set of keys and led them out through a back stairwell that opened into a narrow service alley. The rain had stopped, but the air was heavy. Carrying the smell of wet stone, they moved quickly, but as they turned a corner, a voice called out from the shadows. You can't run forever, Daniel. A man stepped into the light, the same one from earlier, the man in the black coat. Only this time, he wasn't smiling. Midnight's over, he said quietly. Now we play by my rules. Keanu took 1 step forward, his voice calm but edged with steel. No, we play by mine. What happened next would not only decide whether Daniel survived the night, it would reveal why Keanu had refused to walk away from him in the first place. Asterisk. The alley seemed to shrink as the man in the black coat stepped closer. His presence carried a quiet weight, the kind that didn't need raised voices to be dangerous. Daniel froze, but Keanu didn't move back. You don't understand what you're protecting, the man said, his tone low. He isn't just a witness. He's holding something that could burn down more than one empire. Keanu's gaze didn't waver. Then maybe it needs to burn. The man's eyes narrowed. You think this is about justice? It's about survival? And survival means making deals, not moral stands. Keanu shook his head slowly. Survival without integrity isn't survival. It's surrender. For the first time, the man's calm cracked. You're making a mistake. Walk away, and you'll be left alone. Stay, and they'll come for you too. Keanu took a step forward, closing the space between them. Then they'll have to come through me. Behind him, Elena's voice cut in, steady and sharp. Funny thing about alleys in this part of town, they've got more exits than you think. On her signal, two figures emerged from the far end of the alley. Both carried the same steady, watchful posture as Elena. The man in the coat glanced at them, then back at Keanu. You've made your choice, he said finally. So has he. There's no undoing this. He stepped back into the shadows, and a moment later, the sound of a car door closing and an engine starting echoed down the street. The van pulled away, leaving the alley in silence. Daniel's breath came fast, his hands still clenched. That's it. He just leaves. Keanu looked at him. He's not gone. He's just thinking of another way in. But now we're ready. They returned to Elena's safe house, where the three of them sat around the small kitchen table. Daniel pulled a small flash drive from the lining of his jacket. I didn't tell you everything, he admitted. I copied those files before I ran. I thought about destroying them, but something told me not to. Elena leaned forward. What's on it? Names, Daniel said quietly. Politicians, business leaders, people in places we're not supposed to question, and proof they've done things they'd do anything to hide. Keanu's eyes locked on his. Then we make it public. For revenge, for truth, it wasn't simple. The next days were a blur of encrypted transfers, quiet meetings, and people who owed Elena more than one favor. The files went to trusted journalists who still believed in exposing the truth, no matter the cost. When the story finally broke, it didn't mention Daniel's name, didn't mention Keanu's either, but in private corners of the world, powerful. People found themselves facing questions they couldn't silence. A week later, Daniel and Keanu sat in a small cafe near the edge of the city. Outside, the rain tapped softly against the window. I don't know how to thank you, Daniel said. Keanu shook his head. You don't have to. Just, when it's your turn, stand for someone else the way you wish someone had stood for you. Daniel nodded slowly. I will. Keanu smiled faintly. Then that's enough. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, two people whose lives had crossed in the strangest way, bound now by a quiet promise. Somewhere out there, the man in the black coat was still watching. But for now, the storm had passed. Sometimes the strongest weapon isn't the loudest voice or the sharpest blow. It's the choice to stay when walking away would be easier.